If we look at the Mediterranean realm, we see that the Southern Levant is in the very east part of the Mediterranean realm. And why is it so interesting in relevance to the Middle Paleolithic and in general to the archaeological record? Because of this very unique geographical setting, because the abundance of excavated sites, and many of them recent excavated sites, and to the very complex and interesting paleoanthropological record. So let's go to the geographical settings. So the Levant land bridge is known from the Miocene, and this is the part that goes between, that is a bridge, it's a pathway between the African continent and the Euro-Asian. And actually, this aspect is seen very much in the faunal and floral material. It's seen through the ages, and also, of course, in the later periods when hominins are in the story. So it's a very measure basic of the characteristic of the Southern Levant. And we should remember that it's not a one-way. It can be going from east to west, north and south. So it's a very crucial point in being a land bridge for many periods. In addition, it's very interesting because it does not have the same severe influence of the last glacial as in the higher latitudes. So we can see very ameliorating changes in our paleo environment in every aspect. Although they exist, they are far away from the magnitude that we see in the upper latitude. Therefore, the influence on the surrounding, on the paleo-environmental setting, on the faunal and flora is very mild, and is a consequence probably also on the archaeological record. And also in a very relatively small geographical terrain, we have changes from the sea, from the seashore, from the mountain, and then we have the very famous Dead Sea transform, which is this very big transform that has gone from Africa to Lebanon and Syria. So we have changing of the setting of the geographical backbone in a very short geographical distance. In addition, the difference between the moist, more or less moist Mediterranean and arid Mediterranean is very near. So this line can change annually. This is the 200 iso line. It changed in the past and it's changing nowadays. So it's a very flexible change that can be seen in the flora, faunal, and hominin. It will be very much influenced by it. So we have the one that is more stable, the moist area, and the arid fluctuation line that is less stable. So this is just an example of sites. Every star is not necessarily one site, it can be a lump of sites. So we are talking about many sites that were excavated and are currently excavated in various areas, mainly in the Mediterranean region, but not only. So it's a very vivid background in terms of the archaeological news that we can get all the time. And just take, for example, the paleoanthropological record. In a just recent book that came out, edited book about the unveiling the Neanderthals nowadays, we have this map of the distribution of the Neanderthals that is very clearly the Southern Levant is the very end of their distribution. However, in the last 7 years, we had 3 new, I would say, identification of paleoanthropological material with dating that might change completely our understanding of this distribution. So nowadays, the latest is a couple of articles that came out last year. It's a site, Nesher Ramle, that has all the archaeological record, but in addition, it has also Homo remains. And it was identified as a new kind of Homo type that might be the ancestor of both the Neanderthals in Europe and the archaic Homo population in Asia. So this is completely a changing of the paradigm of our understanding which Homo species existed through this period. So this is one change. And we are talking about the site is circa 177 before present. to earlier. And before we had another relevation of a very early dated modern human. Before the sites of Kabza and School were dated to circa 100,000 before present. And this is, again, was one of the earliest sites out of Africa with anatomical modern human. It took a while until the literature in the European realm was ready to accept it, but this is already known for, I don't know, 40 years or so. So we had this early site, and in addition, this actually made this out of Africa even earlier for the anatomical modern human and dated it to 180,000 years before present. Meanwhile, another site was found where a partial calvaria was identified, and this gave the early date of the presence, the actual presence of anatomical modern human. And then we have a dilemma. We suddenly have dates that are around 54,000 years ago, but in the same time, we have at Amud, at Kabara, real remains of Neanderthals. So in terms of the paleoanthropology, really the Southern Levant is very difficult, because when you excavate a site, you cannot know which homotype is responsible for the remains until you have the remains itself. Even then, it can be more complex. So we really have the presence of at least two homotypes or whatever they are identified in the same period. This is a big issue and a big change in comparison to other areas of the world. Of course not. Now, when we go to the prehistoric entities, it's always interesting to go to the recent articles and see that still the real core of the prehistoric entities are the stone tools. Whatever new methods are and whatever new applications are, the real application, understanding, and I would say the king and queen of the prehistoric entities are still the stone tools. Indeed, they are now understood differently in the way that there is more emphasis on the technology. There is a lot of combination with new methods as useware, plant luster, and many other things that might influence the way we look at the prehistoric entities, the way we identify. So a tool is not a tool until it was proven that it was used, and a blade can be a tool, can be reused, and a flake the same manner. And the complexity and the understanding of the stone tools is even more than before, because we understand that this is a dynamic, ongoing process. It's not the production only of something that we call it tool or whatever. It's a way to use it and to reuse it, and sometimes not to use it, to discard it. So all the stone tools analysis is changing while we are excavating and finding all the other things. And indeed, we can see here the opinion recently put forward by Hovers and Belfort-Cohen from the university, and they can see this kind of linkage between the changes that we see in the prehistoric stone tools in understanding how hafting was done and when, and understanding the stone tips, if there were weapons and when they were used, and in the projectiles in connection to the faunal acquisition. So we see here a kind of, sometimes a kind of connection. All in all, they are still viewed as a kind of evolution, that tools will change accordingly to period, to time, and techno-complex entities. In spite of our criticism and re-criticizing, we are still looking at the hunter-gatherers, wherever they are, still there are hardly any, as the models that we try to understand our prehistoric societies. So what we know now that we are more aware of it, that of course it should be examined in each, I would say, geographical area, and it's very unrelevant to compare someone from the Arctic with someone from the Mediterranean. Unfortunately, in the Mediterranean realm, we do not have hunter-gatherers for the last at least 25,000 years ago. So we hardly have with what to compare in 10,000 years ago. what to compare in terms of what is the geographical area that those hunter-gatherers will act. But still, we looked at the hunter-gatherers as the way that we try to depict what was in the future, what was in the past. And actually, the herds are one of this installation or understanding of the behavior of society that most, I would say, archaeologists agree with. The idea that the herd is really a center of activity where social interaction is taking place. And it's a very important and crucial point to understand the behavior, the settlement pattern, and the spatial distribution of a site looking at a certain herd. In terms of behavior, in terms of spatial distribution, in terms of discard of flint or a stone or faunal material, herds are something that almost everybody agree and try to identify the herd on the site and see what is around the herd and what can we learn. And finally, also hunting. I would say that in the last year, it is agreed that the period we are talking about, we do agree that there was hunting, active hunting. And even if there were cases that were maybe incidental scavenging, it's difficult to prove either, but hunting is something that is agreed, and we are talking about active hunting. Not that we always can exactly understand how the hunting took place, but we see the result of it. And the main animals that were explored in this period are actually, in most cases, those big animals. We have the gazelle and the fallow deer that is still present in the area, while the rest are not, and of course the wild boar, the aurochs, that is one of the biggest, the aurochs and the rhinos. We have various species of kind of equids, either a wild onager or a wild horse. We have the wild goat and the red deer. And there are also here and there, quite rarely, the capreolus. So those are the main species that are the ones that are found in sites, and the one that for them we anticipate hunting. And actually, it's interesting because when we look at these big species, those are the species that are supposed to have the greater return rate. They are ranking high in the ranking of the prey. And we think there is something in relation with the efficiency. And the question is it more efficient to hunt a big animal or to hunt what is the effort required for it, or to hunt a few smaller animals that maybe require less effort? Of course, it's very much dependent on the behavior of this animal, on the flight distance, on the arena that these activities take place, the age, the way the folk is made, the gender, the body parts that we can then take back, and of course the science of exploitation. So all these issues are the essence of what we deal when we try to understand how was the exploitation taking place. And there are things that are agreed upon and we take them for granted, and once in a while we have to ask ourselves if they are correct. So the issue of efficiency and greater return rate depends very much how the hunting is taking place. Can we imagine an animal that weighs 1,000 kilos be hunted by one person? Then it should be maybe used by a few, otherwise maybe it's not efficient. You have to throw many parts out if you do not use them and you do not share them. Maybe they didn't think of this efficiency in the way that we try to analyze it. So this is the issue that will always remain because we cannot go into their minds. And we always play with this. We try to say that probably this is how it usually is used. Probably under certain condition, they will ignore most of the animal, and other conditions they will try to explore it mostly. So this is things that we go back and forth with the paleoanthropological literature. We go back and forth to the anthropological literature, and we try to take out what we think is relevant for those sites. And of course, nesting in this idea that there is a process of learning. As we see with the stone tools technology and typology, you need to know how. Whoever ever did the experiment in butchery knows very well, if you have no idea how to do it, it's very difficult. You get into massacre of blood. So the learning, the process of learning how to be used is important. And maybe there is also a tradition how to do it. So sometimes in sites that we can see a few layers that are from certain periods, maybe we can follow this learning, even if there will be a change, a certain change, like in Kavara cave in the species explored, still it will be a change in the same list of knowledge that this group has. So this is also a very important aspect that we look into. I must here point somebody that, although a major part of his career did regular archaeological work, and it came to the same conclusion that I was mentioning, he still once in a while hesitate. Maybe we do invest too much in the importance of meat in the diet. And this is relevant to the Southern Levant because the terrain of Southern Levant, the moist area can hold a lot of edible plants that we have very rare remains of them, but when we have any remains of them, we understand that what is the importance of them. So actually, John Speth argued that we invest too much in thinking that there was efficiency in hunting big animals, that big animals are not so important to the diet. What is important to the diet is fat. Fat is necessary for the development of Homo in any aspect. So the importance was to have enough fat, and therefore he also explained how we ignore those very lean animals in certain season according to the life cycle of especially of ungulates. And he takes the ideas from literature, I would say from anthropological literature from many areas and mainly from the cold areas. So I'm not sure how much is relevant for the Southern Levant, but anyhow, this is an understanding that we maybe overinflate what we found because this is what we found in the way that we interpret it. And actually, John Speth even go further, and he suggests that having being a good hunter is more or less of having these big antlers, and just it's a matter of show off and showing how much you are able, and not necessarily for the nutrition part. So this is completely another view that here and there appears, and we should also remember this notion. But actually, this is not so romantic as we explained. In most cases, we have these very tiny broken bones. And these tiny broken bones are actually the result of what? They can be the result of two pathways, and they can be a combination of the two. Either the exploitation of the animals, or the exploitation and something that happened later on, what we call taphonomy, trampling, or anything else, or the combination of the two. And we have to decipher one from the other. And what is also interesting, that exists many times variability between sites. I would say that the sites that are in the Mediterranean area are not so different, not so far away from one another. And you can take here an example of two caves that are maybe 40 kilometers apart. Both of them have Neanderthal remains, so they are related to Neanderthals. And they are very different in terms of the material that we can see, not in the big species. Actually, the gazelle, the fallow deer, the aurochs are almost in the same distribution, but there are differences in the exploitation of other species, and there's for sure a difference in the way the bones look and what we can extract from them if they are complete or broken. And this is also a question, how can we understand a process in a site, in this case, in the lack of any carnivores? Whenever there are carnivores, we can blame them, and in not like in Europe, in the Southern Levant, we're talking about hyena. In most cases, hyena is the species that is in certain competition or is sharing mainly the cave sites with the hominins, and we the hyena modify bones in order to be able to separate between them and the other activities. So we're pretty good in this, but still, it's always an issue that nowadays new articles point that maybe hyena not only know bones, they can move around the cave and actually make a misorder of what was left by hominin before they enter. So it's much more complex than this. Burned bones. Burned bones are another issue that we always take them seriously, and we report how many burned bones we have, what is the percentage per species. Sometimes we go to the body parts and we try to elaborate whatever is possible from the burned bone. But what do they mean? If we indeed appreciate the importance of heating bones, that was proven again and again, that this is a very important aspect. Maybe it can be muted. Okay, thank you. That the burnt bones are very important, I would say, proof that bones were did something with fire. But if we want to heat the meat or we want to extract the oil from the bones, we do not incinerate the bones. They will only have be very lightly burned. If we toss them in our hearth, of course, it's something else. But in order to understand to which degree the meat or what we want to extract from the bones was heated, we have a problem with those that are very burnt bones. I think that in our area, using bones for fire is less probable, because we had probably enough trees, and we know that this is not a very efficient issue. However, we are left with burnt bones that we report, but we do not always know how to explain them, because we cannot always correlate the temperature that it was burned with what we see. We say brown, black, and I know there's a whole school that experiments a lot with burnt bones, but it didn't always went into our reports and how to correlate between the two. I think we're still in the process of doing this, but we are still believe in it very much. For example, if we look at this waterlogged site that was excavated by Gonen Sharon from the Tel Chai College in the north, it's on the Jordan Valley up in the north, and it's very well dated. It has no hominin remains, but because it's a waterlogged site, it has a lot of preservation of wood, seeds, fruit, pollen that is very, very rare. Of course, whenever we have pollen or plant material, the information we gain is in a way much higher than other animal bone, so we can know more about the surrounding. And in this peculiar waterlogged site, we have very large aurochs. You can see here the comparison between a recent base of a skull of a big cow comparison with the size of the aurochs. We know that the aurochs was very large, and its size fluctuates along the period. And we have complete bones. Complete bones are also strange. In most of our sites, we have very rarely complete bones. We always have broken bones. So the question is why we have complete bones, but there are not only complete bones in these sites, there are also broken bones. And look at the color. We cannot identify bird bones in waterlogged sites, and this is from the Roman to the very early period. So we still have to look for a method that can say what is burn bone in waterlogged sites. And there are cut marks, there are broken bones. Luckily, we have remains of extraction from marrow. We have the blow extraction from marrow, and we are trying to quantify in a way the size and the shape of these cut marks, together with Silvia Bello from the Natural History Museum in London, using alicona that can go better to really reconstruct the shape. And this is now a procedure that is done also by others. And of course, sometimes the aim is to try to correlate to a certain tool. I'm not sure we can do it, but we can quantify, and we can see if we have certain marks that are different than others, and try to understand them. What is interesting in this site that represents many other sites from this period all over European and in the Southern Levant is the presence of tortoises. They keep changing their name. They used to be Celonia, now they are tortoises. But what is unique here, we do not have only the spur-type tortoise, what we know, the regular tortoise that is in most cases, Testudo graecia. We also have the Western Caspian turtle, which is a kind of a pond turtle. So it's very interesting to have the two. This is very rare, and I think this is one of the earliest sites that was proven that we have both. What is interesting, we have both. You can see the conjoinable pieces of them, but in addition, they were used, they were broken. The anthropogenic breakage is regardless of the species. And here we can remind us, if at all the way we identify species was as important to the previous population. This is a question that was tackled before, and we can tackle it again. And it's a question. Maybe it's easily to see them apart. They smell differently, they look different, but somehow how they were used in the same manner, both the fresh turtle and the tortoise. And this is very interesting and should be bear in mind for other sites. Both of them were brought because they are not very common in this area. Of course, another way to look at to understand better the fauna is to try to see what was eaten, how it was eaten, and the seasonality. We are very much interested in the seasonality because seasonality is supposed to give us the idea for how long the occupation was used, and we'll come back to it later. And this is just an example of one of Florent Rival's work, and this is a sample from this site, Nahal Mahanaim outlet, and he could look at the aurochs, he could look at the dama, and he could show what we archaeologists already suspected, that the aurochs were used in very short seasonal events, and still we have to connect it to the tortoise and to the other species that were exploited. But this is another independent way to look at the tooth microwear and to understand what happened in a certain site. Another example that actually goes between the spatial distribution and other aspects, it's the site that is now in Syria, the Quneitra, up in the Golan Heights. And this was a fantastic site, excavated by Professor Goren Nama Imbar from the Hebrew University. And it's one layer, a dream of every archaeologist. It's simply one layer that was covered with a pond. And this one layer was very good in order to understand the behavior that we can anticipate from stones and bones. No human remains, but the date is 55,000 before present. And you can see that the richness of the site, many bones were there. And you can see the accumulation of bones and stone tools. There are cut marks. There are also animal. And you can see the exfoliation that sometimes prevents us from seeing cut marks. And you can see here very nicely one of the cases that you could use the newer geographical system and to try to really see the spatial distribution. Now, in order to be able to see a spatial distribution, you need what Binford used to call the Pompeii effect, right? Everything should have been left as it was, which in many cases it's very difficult to assume, but sometimes we have those cases. Every dream of every archaeologist is that everything will be covered fast in a very thin sediment. So this was the case here, and therefore a more elaborated, I would say, geographical examination of the spatial distribution could be done. And you can see here that how the lithic artifacts are joined together, and you can see the connection between the artifact, the lithic artifact, and the faunal remains. And what is very interesting, you can see here that there is some connection between the hammerstone and the bones that were flaked, that really had evidence of flaking. So maybe we have really the last season of usage of this site that aurochs, horses, rhinos were really used, were really hunted, butchered, and the bones were broken in order to extract the marrow. So this is a very nice example. And also in this site, there were also signs of animal gnawing. Meanwhile, one of the stones showed this kind of round circle that was seen by Naman, published in 1990, by Marshak in 96, calling it a Middle Paleolithic symbolic composition from the Golan Heights, the earliest known depicted image, and lately published again in another aspect, because one of the pieces from the site that was published many years ago had these kinds of marks, round marks, not clear, on a piece of femur shaft of aurochs. But actually, what was strange, that I couldn't understand which animal did it. It didn't look like hyena, it didn't look like lion, and I said maybe it's the leftover of clothes, but I wasn't sure, and I left it vaguely undescriptive. Lately, looking at it again and comparing it to what we see on this plaque, Dana Shafan, that is specialist in prehistoric art, could see in detail the image that those people wanted to show on a piece that was already broken, because they took into consideration all the pieces of this piece of bone. So it was already a piece of a flake of a shaft, and did this round circles that are in the same image idea what was on the plaque. So this is really a very early example of usage of bone from non-utilitarian the way we see it. Maybe it was used for other aspects. That this we should remember, that animal products can serve in methods that we do not know, and we should look for it because sometimes they are not only for eating or heating or things like this. So this is a very nice example. If I leave just and I want to jump to another period, another techno-complex that is related to Europe. And this is the Levantine Aurignacian. I don't know how many articles have been written about this entity, because it's very peculiar. It occurs in an area where you have other entities like Dark Marian, but it has a flavor of the European Aurignacian. And this is why it was called Levantine Aurignacians. In terms of indeed what it has bone and antler tools, it has the split base points, and it has pendant of deer teeth. So it is nested in the Levant in an area that had other entities before and after, but has this fashion from the Europe. So indeed, one of the known sites was Hayonim, and lately also Manot. Remember the Manot that I mentioned, the dating, so it has this Levantine Aurignacian, and only the stars from this map belong to the Levantine Aurignacian, and you can see that meanwhile there are other entities that exist in the same period. In one of the sites in Hayonim cave, there were, in addition to the regular, gazelle, dama, etc., thousands of bones, very dense 3 layers of occupation, studied by Annabelle Vercoen, and then the bones were studied by me. We had also bird bones, but many. We're talking about many bird bones that belong to 52 families, were identified by Professor Tal Simons, and they have many cut marks. Now there are cut marks, clear cut marks. There is a nice distribution of body parts, and there are also those burns that are only a bit heated. And nowadays, we suspect that this heating may be related not at all to the usage to certain aspects of this birth. Maybe it's actually related to the usage of creating bone tools. So we'll see it later. However, what is interesting, we have cut marks on goose, on mallards. And here you can see the classical cut marks that are mainly on the wing and on the chest. We have the great bustard, which is a huge bird. It's really a very impressive bird, and we have again in various areas some cut marks. We have the dove, the rock dove that has cut marks, and we should remember that none of these species really have to live in the cave. And we have one of the sites that is along the very big migration between Europe and Africa that nowadays they encompass 1 million of birds. So probably this already exists then days. And we have the black vulture. This is by the classical, what we know until now. We have cut marks on the wing, and we do have cut marks on the talons. The idea was that most of the birds of prey were used either for the wings and for the talons, symbolically already from the Neanderthals. We have examples all along Europe, especially in Spain. And the talons can be used in many aspects, utilitarian or just symbolic. What is interesting, we have most of the assemblage is of griffon vultures. And this is completely different from the previous paradigm. We have cut marks all over the body. along the wing, along the neck, along the wishbone, along the area of the chest, along the legs, all along the legs, and also down on the talons. So here it's completely a different usage of the griffon that again is comprise more than 40% of the birds of this size. And we do know that there is a attitude to deal with the birds of prey differently, but this is different than what we know from other sites, and it's very interesting. And maybe we should think differently what was done with the birds of prey in certain. Staying with this site, with Ionian Cave, because it's a Levantine urination, so what is so urination about it? Let's see if we have other aspects that we can look at. So gazelle was the most exploited animal, and there are many cut marks. The conditions are very good, so there were many cut marks. And when I worked on this many years ago, I mentioned the cut marks, I drawing, statistic, and etc. But lately, when a colleague that is specialist on looking on signs that are not cut marks, let me look again and pointed out that there is a different location and shape between those that are related to this articulation of the scapula from the humerus in comparison to those that are completely something else. And they are not related, and they are not in the same size, shape, and manner as those that are cut marks. So the differentiation is very clear. This was, of course, Chemi Tajero. And taking those in detail and having it also on a hyoid bone, as you can see here, we took it to the same, we measured, we looked in detail, and then we came out to a whole entire world of this kind of marks that are called notation, and they are very typical to the early urination in Europe. They also exist in Africa. And it's interesting because here they are always appear on gazelle. Gazelle is the most exploited animal. So it's taking the idea of this kind of notation that was already in the early urination, bringing it to the Levantine urination, but using it in the most common animals. So this is adopting some of the idea in a local aspect. The same is very interesting when we look at those deer canines. Till now, none of the archaeologists in Israel, in the Southern Levant, ever identified a red deer canine in the assemblage. The only one that we have the one that are perforated. We have red deer, we have teeth, but we don't have canines of red deer, which is very strange, but we do have them perforated in Manot, another Levantine urination site, and in Hayonim, which is very interesting. And sometimes they do the same application to bovid incisor, and sometimes but in most cases it's on red deer and in bovid incisor. So it's very interesting. Again, this is a very urination European or urination in general behavior adopted to this site. And it's very elaborated. You can see the way the hole are made, and even in the scraping of creating this hole, you can see that there were usage of ochre inside. This is very interesting. So actually, what we know and what we do not know. We know the species, we are able to identify birds, we're able to identify tortoises, we can identify what is burned, what is not burned, but still it seems that there are certain aspects that are missing or are not completely understood from the puzzle. I think one of the issues is the scale. I think it's always the issue, how long is the occupation? What does occupation mean? Do we know what the occupation means? What is short, what is long? Even in the very well-dated, excavated, pristine sites, we have no idea indeed what is the time scale. The time scale of the archaeological prehistoric dating and the time scale of living human Homo is very different. And I think this leg still exists because when we try to explain a situation, we take into consideration the longevity of occupation, and it's not always possible. But we have to do it because otherwise we are left in a vague idea. And I think this is a major issue, the scale. And also the quantities. What do we say about quantities? How many bones and how many animals are there? we have many sophisticated way to calculate how many bones, and then to say how minimal number of individuals, or how many elements should have been, and how many exist, and so forth. But we have one of the issues that it's considered, but many, what do we do if probably happened that stripes of meats were brought without the bone, and maybe they were very important to the diet? We have no way to do it, and we always assume that this was done mainly with those very large animals, because the schlepp effect, you don't want to bring a very heavy animal up the hill or to drag it from many meters. You prefer to bring only striped meat. So we're left with this question, and we can answer it only by maybe using zooms, and if we have enough paleoanthropological material to examine what was eaten. But this is an important issue, and it's left. And also, when we look at the very broken bones, we can ignore them, we can start to calculate them. They are there, they say something, and it's very difficult sometimes to analyze them, but they are definitely part of the story. So I think we are trying to improve our way to calculate, and we have to give maybe the raw material, the raw data, what is the manipulation that we did, and then everyone can interpret it as he wants, as she wants. But it's an important issue how we, and it does go together with the scale. What is the quantity and what is the scale? Those go together. And of course, when we talk about the size of the group, this is all nested in the same issue. How much do we invest in species identification? Is it important? So lately, we have two examples of estiprated species that were just identified, and this is the crested rat and the African adder. So let's look. In the Judean desert, near the Dead Sea, the first time it was found in a well-dated deep, you can see those caves that could be very well dated, a crested rat that was not known before in the record, and it was dated between 1,000 to 40,000, 42,000 years before present, and it was related to a melioration in the condition that might be connected to the arrival of waves of Homo sapiens to the area. However, it's very interesting because one animal that was well dated would give us an idea of a period that we have less information in such a detailed manner, and this was actually due mainly to the effort that was done in the Judean desert near the Dead Sea, and to the efforts done to identify it and to date it. So this is completely a new story that gives us new ideas that we had not had before. And the same happened with material from a study was done on the snakes from Kazde Cave. And in this study, suddenly appeared something that was not known before. And this is the African adder. You can see here parts of its maxilla, and with a recent one. Nowadays, is distributed in sub-Saharan Africa and in Southern Saudi Arabia. It's a snake of the size of 2 meters. You don't want to have it near you, but it's used nowadays as poison. So the question is, because Kazde, we say it's Homo sapiens, it's circa 100,000 years before present, was it brought as what people were used from Africa to use it as poison? Is it arrived because the amelioration of condition, if it was in MIS 5B, and etc.? So suddenly we have one species that can give us a story or can pose new questions of research that were not known before, because effort was put in order to identify the exact species. So we sometimes have to remember this as well. The same with the rhino species. In our literature, we have all kinds of rhinos, and never a detailed study was done on identifying the rhinos that exist in this area. So each time we give them what is known to be the most common species, but the study is definitely required to see if we have one rhinos. We know that rhinos were many species, and to go deeper and to understand what they represent, where even if they are not numerous in various sites. And another issue that is of interest, and that we assume it always, is the who did what and what was the gender division of labor. So this is a big question, and it's addressed once in a while. Is it the woman the gatherer and man the hunter? Was it vice versa? Do we have any way to explore this? Do we know? How can we deal with this? And much was written about this, and I'm not sure that we have so many evidence for the earlier period. I know that in later period in South America now there are evidences of women hunters, but it doesn't go as back as our record. And this is an interesting question because we assume many things by this division of labor. And indeed, as much as saying that the measure maybe part of the diet was the gathering and the hunting was just something once in a while, festivity or to show off, was something social, but not necessarily part of the daily life. And this has many implications of how we understand the life of prehistoric society. And in this issue would go also if there were communal tasks, if there was hunting together, gathering together. Do we imagine the 25 people in this mythic group, or this is something we invented? Do we see families the way we see them nowadays? And this is again understanding the social realm on which we look at the remains. So I think this is something that we do not know yet, and each time there is a new fashion, and there are many articles about this, but I think we're a bit far from understanding these issues. And this is, of course, my favorite. You can understand it very well, those photos. And just to finish with something that is outrageous, but who knows? Fire in the Mediterranean realm is not a blessing. Although there was a fire yesterday in Rome, there are fires all the time in Israel, and fire in summer is a terrible thing. We know that the shrubs, the Mediterranean shrubs, can survive quite well after the fire, but animals, people, and others do not. But fire, for instance, we know it very well now, it was studied by several researchers in Australia, is a common use, not only in order to free space for agriculture, and then we know what happens, but it's also used in order to cause especially reptiles in amphibians to go out of their areas, to run away, and then they are kept. Then they are caught, and they are caught in the manner that is between hunting and gathering, but they are caught. So the usage of fire is for us, for the bad connotation we have in the Mediterranean realm, it's difficult to imagine, but maybe we should try to sometimes think with all these new methods that we have nowadays that can see very well the way things were in the sediments, and we can extract much better the plant material. Maybe we can think of this also as a possibility. And I want to finish with this idea that archaeological evidence is a very complex discourse, and to thank you for listening.